Our next story comes from Russia. Vladimir Putin cannot stop praising India. From hailing Make in India to calling the G20 summit Prime Minister Modi's personal success, the Russian president has been making such statements through this year. The latest one came yesterday at the Valday discussion club. Vladimir Putin has delivered a keynote address there. It's an annual affair. He does it every year, usually with the same template: panning the West, blaming NATO and praising Russia. But this year, Putin was singing praises for another country too, and that is India. Listen to this.
India is the ancient global civilization. It's a huge civilization. It's a powerful civilization with vast potential. As for the Group of 20, that was a success of the Indian authorities and of Prime Minister Modi personally. That was a success.
Well, that was Putin talking about India's G20 summit. India hosted the Leaders' Summit last month. Putin did not attend, but he's now calling it a success. He's lauding India for brokering consensus. Like I said, he's been praising India and its leadership for a while now.
When I say you, I'm talking about our two countries share very good and positive relations with Prime Minister Modi. He's a very wise man, and India has been making great strides in its development under his leadership.
In this regard, we should learn from many partners of ours, mainly our partners in India. They are mostly focusing on production and use of the cars and vessels produced in India. In this regard, Prime Minister Modi is doing the right thing by encouraging people to use the brand Made in India.
So why is the Russian president wooing India? Well, one reason is the historical ties. The second is the current political atmosphere. Tensions with the West are at an all-time high. Russia is under multiple sanctions. The world is under pressure to pick sides, but India has remained neutral. India has called for peace, and it hasn't stopped buying Russian oil. The West put a lot of pressure, but India refused to bow. And Russia and India are old partners. We have a long history of military cooperation. Russia is India's largest supplier of defense equipment, even though the sales have dropped. In the past decade, Russian arms sales to India have dropped by 65%. In 2022, it was worth $1.3 billion. Meanwhile, defense sales from the US have jumped by 58%. Last year, it was worth $219 million. So it's still a very small figure compared to Russia. But the trend could have Putin worried. So while he's praising India, he's also issuing a warning for the West. He said, don't try to create a rift between India and Russia.
They are trying to cast everyone who is not ready to blindly follow these Western elites as the enemy. Anyone. China in certain situations. At a certain point in time, they tried to do the same with India. Now they are flirting, of course. We all understand this very well. We feel and see the situation in Asia. Everything is clear. I want to say that the Indian leadership is self-directed. It is led by the national interests. I think that those attempts make no sense.
But praise for India aside, much of what Putin said was along predictable lines. He slammed the West for creating its own rules. He talked about Russia's mission to create a new world. And he defended the war in Ukraine. These three things stood out in his speech. The first was about nuclear warfare. Putin says Russia has successfully tested a nuclear-powered cruise missile. It's an experimental weapon known as Burevestnik. The NATO calls it Skyfall. Now, it is powered by a nuclear reactor. It is capable of carrying a nuclear warhead, and it is said to have unlimited range. But very little is known about its capabilities or the test that Putin is talking about. And here's something else that he said. He said that Russia could withdraw its ratification of the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Moscow last tested a nuclear weapon in 1990, when it was part of the Soviet Union. Now, Putin is talking about pulling out of the treaty. Does that mean Russia will conduct a nuclear test? Here's what their president said.
I am not ready now to say whether we should conduct nuclear tests or not. But to behave in a mirror way in relations with the United States, I repeat once again, they signed but did not ratify the International Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and we signed and ratified it. In principle, one can behave in a mirror way with the US, but this is a question for State Duma deputies. In theory, this ratification could be revoked.
He also spoke about Yevgeny Prigozhin, the Wagner chief, the man who challenged Putin's leadership. In June, Prigozhin led an armed rebellion against Moscow. It was the first big threat to Putin's rule in 2 decades. But midway, Prigozhin stopped. He cracked a deal with the leadership. He was exiled to Belarus and now he's dead in a plane crash. All signs pointed at foul play by the Kremlin, but Putin suggests that the crash was caused by hand grenades detonating inside the plane.
The director of the investigative committee reported recently to me that hand grenade fragments were found in bodies of those killed in the air accident. There was no external impact on the plane. That's the stated fact. That's the result of the expertise conducted by the investigative committee of the Russian Federation.
Of course, these are Putin's claims. There is no evidence to prove them or to suggest otherwise. And then Putin talked about the war. He started it in February last year. Moscow expected Kiev to fall in 3 days. It's been 590 days and the capital still stands. It's now being called the forever war, and that's not necessarily a setback for Putin. The prolonged offensive is tiring the West. War fatigue has set in. The funding is drying and the morale is dipping. So while Putin may not be winning this war against NATO, he's not even losing it.